Good evening. I'm Don Hobson, the campus minister and one of the directors of the Wesley Foundation here in Ames, Iowa. We're very fortunate to have the co-sponsorship of the lecture committee of ISU joining us this evening and asking Dan Sheehan to come to the area. Danny Sheehan is presently the general counsel for the Christic Institute. That is a public interest law firm which has been involved in the Karen Silkwood case from the very beginning. In fact, the Institute came into being from the group of lawyers and investigators and feminists who won the $10.5 million settlement from Kerr-McGee Corporation in 1979. Mr. Sheehan is also an adjunct professor of constitutional law at Antioch School of Law in Washington, D.C. He is chairman for the Fund for Constitutional Government, also in Washington. He graduated from Harvard Law School in 1970, having done his honors thesis on constitutional law, especially the Miranda decision. Among his better-known cases are these: the defense of persons involved in the Greensboro and Wounded Knee, citizens of 3 Mile Island, the Attica prison inmates, the defense of the following individuals: Daniel Berrigan, Dick Gregory, Philip Berrigan, and Daniel Ellsberg. He comes to us then with a long list of credits in terms of his work in law. But I think another word that needs to be added here is that he is a man who understands that the very structures of our society have to be dealt with, and one of the most profound ways of dealing with them is in the influence of public policy through these legal structures. And he comes to us with that great concern to have an impact upon the structures of our society, the policy-making instruments of the communities in which we live. It is a pleasure to present Danny Sheehan.
Good evening. It's getting to be a lot of familiar faces out here. This is actually the 4th time that I've had an opportunity to speak with people in the community in the last 2 days, and every time I look out and start to see additional people that I've already spoken with, I start to get a little self-conscious about having to try to figure out something new to say about all this. But this is the opportunity that I've been waiting for, to talk to probably the largest number of people and to have the most open opportunity to discuss some of these issues with people, because we're not stuck in between, a lunch hour, or I was stuck in between 2 religious services yesterday morning, and there's always been a lot of pressure on us to try to get the thing shoved into about 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and I'm getting signs from the rear of the room going, right when I'm getting to a really good story. So that what we have this evening is an opportunity to really try to cover in a somewhat comprehensive way a lot of the issues that people have come up afterwards and asked me additional questions about, and comments that they've made. And we also want to have an opportunity, of course, to answer questions here tonight. So what we have is approximately 90 minutes or so, and I'd like to have, as much as 20 minutes to possibly half an hour to answer specific questions that people might have when we complete the initial presentation, so that I'm going to try to break down the discussion into approximately 55, 60 minutes, give us a little time to ask some questions and possibly have people take a break and go out and get a drink and visit the head and do some other things, so that we can have a fairly open discussion of some of these things. Now, Don has already given you some basic idea of who I am, and what I'd like to do is at the beginning of the thing is to first tell you really sort of who I am and why specifically that I'm here. I guess everybody knows that I was the chief counsel in the Karen Silkwood case, that I supervised the entire private investigation of the case and the preparation of the complaint, the depositions, and supervised the trial and all the appellate briefs, etc. But whenever I get an opportunity to come to talk to people, I always try to think back into the time when I was in sort of the same position that most of you are, that, in my undergraduate studies, or some people who were in graduate school, or are some of the things, at least that I've already been through. Some of you are older than I am, and I haven't been there yet, so I don't know quite how to get that perspective in. But I do try to think back to when I was at Harvard College or Harvard Law School and had an opportunity to come to listen to somebody, and I always wanted to have them at least talk to me in the way that I was prepared to hear what they were saying, rather than coming on and telling us how, oh, I run a Wall Street law firm and make $500,000 a minute, and this is the latest case I did, and here's my friend from the United States Supreme Court. It's awfully hard to relate to that kind of stuff, and you end up thinking that, gee, you're not really doing very much, or you sure wish you had the same kind of things that person does, and that kind of introduction tends to make people feel kind of powerless, that they don't have an actual opportunity to participate in these kind of pieces of history. And so I want to make it clear at the outset that one of the real objectives that I have here is trying to make sure that all of you understand that the people who actually did the Karen Silkwood case are folks very, very much like yourself. That were folks who've tried to go to school and learn some stuff. We had an opportunity to go to school because our parents' generation made a lot of sacrifices and saved and gave us an opportunity to get to go to school. And we've tried to share these things with people. So there's nothing very spectacular about any of us that worked on the Karen Silkwood case. That there's probably a dozen people, any one of whom, if they hadn't done their job, the Karen Silkwood case never would have come to the eventual success that it has. And so another thing I want to make clear is that this has been sort of a collective effort, a community effort, different constituencies, etc., that have helped make this thing real. So don't, just because I happen to have had the opportunity to come here to talk to you, think that I'm the only one that really played a major role in this case. There have been lots of other people, and I'll touch upon some of these people as we continue. But since I have access to the information about myself more than anybody else, that I want to just quickly try to set you at ease a little bit as to who I am. I've had an opportunity to work on some of these cases that Don has mentioned, but I was born and raised. I was raised in a little town up in northern New York, up in Lake George, and I had 3,000 people in my whole town when I grew up and went to high school, and I graduated with 50 kids from my high school. And over the years, I've had an opportunity to get to participate in some of these cases, and you may have come from towns bigger than I did, or perhaps smaller than I did, but it doesn't require coming from New York City or Chicago or one of these great big places to really have the kind of confidence and know-how to do some of these things. So that's where I came from, and ended up working at the Jesuit National Headquarters. It was the big headquarters staff in Washington, D.C. for the Jesuit priests here in the United States. And I was working there in that office when I was contacted by a fellow. I was doing a trial. I just got through doing the closing argument in this trial, and he was one of the defendants in the trial, and of course they were acquitted. And he came over to me and said, gee, that was really fun. I've never really participated in a trial like this before, and it seemed like it was a lot of fun. And he said that there's a friend of mine by the name of Patricia who works for the National Organization for Women, and they've been trying to find a lawyer that would help them do something about this Karen Silkwood case. Well, this was 1975. And so I said, Karen Silkwood, what's that? And they said, well, that's the lady that got killed out in Oklahoma trying to deliver those documents to the New York Times about that nuclear facility. And I said, I remember that. I saw the Harry Reasoner show about that. And the guy went, yeah, right, the Harry Reasoner show. But anyway, he said, would you come and talk to Patty Neiman? She was working for NPR at the time, and also was working for Now. So I went over and talked to the people, and they asked me if I would meet with Bill and Merle Silkwood, Karen's mom and dad, and see if there was anything we could do to help on this case. So I agreed to do that, and everything started from there. You know, in a small office, just a handful of us. We didn't have any money. They didn't have any money. You know, Bill Silkwood is a house painter in Nederland, Texas, and Merle is a teller at the local bank. You know, they're not about ready to be able to raise the $625,000 that this case has cost from the beginning up until now. And frankly, I didn't know how to raise any money like that when they came to talk to me. But since I was working at the Jesuit headquarters and had learned to try to place a little bit of faith in people that we'd all together do the right thing, I agreed that I thought we could probably figure this thing out together. And so that's where I started. And so what I want to do tonight is make it clear that, you know, obviously the reason that I'm here is that, as most of you have heard, on January 11th this month, the United States Supreme Court has affirmed the $10.5 million judgment against the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation on behalf of Karen Silkwood. And that means that within the near future sometime, her children are probably going to end up being paid something in the area of $15 million with all the interest that's been accruing on the thing. And so that makes it the largest standing personal injury judgment in the entire history of the United States. And that gives us some idea of the context and the importance that people have placed on this case. And so I wanted to come here today to give that a little more meaning to you than just having heard it on CBS News or on one of the cable news networks or something. And secondly, it's come to people's attention, I guess, that the Karen Silkwood movie is now out, that Meryl Streep has made this movie playing Karen Silkwood. It was directed by Mike Nichols, and Cher actually acts in this movie. And so that some people have already gotten a chance to see the thing, and some people probably will be seeing it in the near future. So what I wanted to do is to come here and help explain some of the things you don't see in the movie and get people interested in this whole issue. Now, the fact of the matter is, our office in Washington, D.C. doesn't get any of that money. That, you know, we have agreed to do the case for free. We agreed to do that when we began, and we've had to raise money from people like yourself around the country through direct mail, and you know, we've done concerts. We got Jackson Browne to do concerts for us, and Bonnie Raitt, and some of the other people who are interested in this issue, and we just raised the money. But now we're at the point where the movie is out, and they anticipate some 60 million people seeing the movie. So that's quite a public education operation. And so what I wanted to do is to help the people here in this community get a better understanding of the whole case in the context of this movie. But most importantly, what I want to do is I want to try to help bring you in to the group of people who have been working hard on this campaign now for almost 9 years, because there is still a lot of stuff that has to be done. This case was not started for the purpose of just getting $15 million for Karen Silkwood's 3 children. And it wasn't started for sure to get $50 million for ABC Theater making the Karen Silkwood movie. It was designed to bring about justice in the country in relationship to the issues that existed in that case. Now, obviously, there are some good things to be said, both about how far the United States Supreme Court has gone so far and how far the movie has gone so far. So I've come here also to help celebrate those good things, but to also point out to you an important warning that is implicit in the Karen Silkwood case, and what the Supreme Court has not done, and what the movie does not tell you about. And so I'm here tonight to celebrate and to warn you about some of these matters. Now, I want to tell you briefly what the things are that I want to warn you about, so you'll know ahead of time what's coming here. That one of the most important things that we came to know from working on the Karen Silkwood case, and those of you who've been good enough to come out and listen to me talk earlier know what these things are, but the first thing that we discovered is that it is absolutely clear and established now beyond, I think, any reasonable doubt by this case, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is the federal agency which has been assigned the responsibility for safeguarding the health and safety of the American citizens in relationship to the private nuclear industry, is never going to give you adequate protection. That it, in fact, has been demonstrated in this case that they don't even pretend, once you get them cornered, to be promising you really adequate protection. What they do say is that they have made a determination as to what levels of radiation injury are going to be acceptable around these nuclear facilities. And I'll get into some detail about that in giving you some of the details of our interrogation of Mr. Kepler, who is the director of Region 3 of the NRC, and how he first tried to convince the jury in Oklahoma that the regulations made the operation of these facilities safe, but then later, under cross-examination, amended his position to saying that all it does is ensures that the levels of cancer, levels of leukemia, and other irradiation injuries would in fact be held down to a, quote, acceptable level. The second warning that I'd like to convey to you this evening is the warning that now, for the first time in American history since the year 1871, the Justice Department, the United States Justice Department, has taken the position that the Federal Civil Rights Act does not protect American citizens against conspiracies which are designed to deprive you of your constitutionally guaranteed rights because of your political beliefs or political activities. Now, that is a new thing that has occurred here, and it's a very important thing for us to fully understand, I think, if we're going to understand the repercussions of the Karen Silkwood case. So what the Supreme Court has in fact done is only a partial protection of the American people, and what the movie has done is it has only communicated to you a portion of the truth in the Karen Silkwood case. So what I want to do first is sort of help get us all squared away on the facts of the Karen Silkwood case, and to help do that I'd like to get some idea, so I won't be boring people with things they've already known if everybody's seen the movie or if everybody's read one of the books. How many people have actually had an opportunity to see the Karen Silkwood movie already? Oh, not bad, not bad. Okay, how many people have ever had an opportunity to read either one of the books here? This is a book by Richard Rashke called The Killing of Karen Silkwood that goes into a great deal more detail than the movie did. Got one, two, got about 4 or 5 folks. There's another book out called Who Killed Karen Silkwood by Howard Cohn, who is the Washington bureau chief of Rolling Stone magazine. Now, has anybody had an opportunity to read this one? Got one person. You win it. Oh, no, all right. So at least that helps me, that I know that some people have read this. Most people have seen the movie. Now, has anyone had an opportunity to see on NBC a movie that was called The Plutonium Incident? Because some people called up on the radio today who'd seen that. There's about a half a dozen folks who've seen that. And how many people got a chance to see The China Syndrome? Okay, so that's helpful too, because there's a bunch of Silkwood stuff in that. There's also been a Lou Grant show that was on one time, showing a man actually get run down and killed while he's on the way to deliver some documents about a nuclear facility to the newspaper that Lou Grant ran. Has anybody had an opportunity to see that? Okay, so we got another handful of people. Okay, so we've got a fair knowledge of what's going on here. Now let me, based upon that assumption, communicate to you some of the things that were not told to you in the movie or in some of the books, but mostly what wasn't told you in the movie. It's interesting. So let me approach it under the two headings of, what the issues are with regard to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission not protecting you, and then the issue with regard to the Federal Civil Rights Act. That most people in the country know that there is a Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they understand that this is the federal agency that is supposed to establish standards pursuant to which these nuclear facilities are supposed to operate. Now, you also know, of course, at the same time, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is the agency that was supposed to have regulated 3 Mile Island so that it wouldn't melt down. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is also the agency that was supposed to be regulating the construction of Diablo Canyon out in California when they put in the nuclear reactor core backwards. And when they put in the nuclear reactor core backwards, the NRC is also the agency that said, that's not so bad, just read the dials backwards. That's the same NRC. Now there's some information out around about the NRC, but what I want to do is help share some additional information with you that you'll find even funnier than those stories. That when we began to move into this area, I was asked by the family, they said, to look into what happened. We filed the lawsuit. We went over and asked we filed a subpoena with the NRC and asked them to give us all these documents, and they claimed that they couldn't because, of course, this was national security information. And so, therefore, they couldn't really give us this information. And so we said, well, what about all the dead fish we heard about, out in the river near the Kerr-McGee Corporation? How did all that happen? Well, that's national security stuff. Dead fish are national security stuff. So I knew we were going to have trouble with this outfit right early on. And so we then had people go to the FBI, say to the FBI, hey, what's the story about this lady getting killed, run off the highway and killed? Well, we don't know. We don't do automobile accident investigations. Well, what about the documents this lady had, bringing them to the New York Times? Well, Kerr-McGee said she didn't have any documents because the documents were allegedly documents showing falsification of safety tests, and Kerr-McGee said that they didn't falsify the safety tests. Well, thank you, Ephraim Zimberlis. We said, thanks a lot. Looks like we're going to have to handle this part on our own, too. So as we began to inquire into this thing, we had this dual focus of a serious concern about the civil rights violations that had happened to Karen Silkwood, or appeared to have happened to Karen Silkwood at that time, and yet we realized the FBI wasn't going to help us find out anything about that. And on the other hand, we had all this information about the contamination of her home and all that kind of stuff. It turns out that it was clear that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission wasn't going to help us on that either. So it put us into what I think is probably a very healthy posture of realizing that you can't bet on these people. That if you want to do anything, you're going to have to do it yourself. Now, of course, that's what a lot of people like Kerr-McGee and stuff depend upon, is that we aren't going to have either the courage or the know-how to go about dealing with some of these types of cases. Now, the sad part was that they were probably right when we started out on this thing, and yet we said, look, why let the perfect way of going at this case become the paralysis for the possible? We'll do it as best we can and try to find out what we can. And so I guess probably the best way to go at this thing is sort of to share with you what we started finding out when we found it out, and sort of portray for you the conduct of a lot of these federal agencies, always keeping it in the context of the fact that this is a warning story about what the NRC won't do and the dangers that we have with regard to civil liberties. Here's how it started to unfold. Bill and Merle came to see me in Washington and asked me if I would file a lawsuit on behalf of their daughter. And I said, look, the way we handle things here at the Jesuit office is that we will do litigation, but only when the facts are fairly clear so that we can deal with the public policy issues that are important in the case. We don't just go out and try to get a case to make lots of money for the client, like most law firms do. And so I said, we have to have an opportunity to look into this to begin with. And so they said, okay, go ahead and do that and see if there's a good case here. So I get on the phone and I call up a good friend of mine, a fellow by the name of William John Stone Taylor. And I got to know him when I worked for F. Lee Bailey. I worked for Lee Bailey for a couple of years as one of the 3 litigation attorneys in his office. It was where we got to work on the James McCord case. That was the case in our office at the time, among others. And, of course, as you may know, he was the Watergate burglar, the wiretapper in Watergate. Well, that case happened to be in the office when I was there, as the Pentagon Papers case happened to be in the office when I was in the Wall Street law firm, and I had the opportunity to work on that case and see all 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers. And that my political education was occurring at a fairly rapid pace after I got out of law school. And so in any event, I got a hold of William Johnstone Taylor. I fly down to Florida, where he's a private investigator down there now, and talk with him. He's out on a big yacht. He's captaining this yacht for some big gunsel from Chicago. And so I go out and try to talk him into coming in to help us look into this case. His wife Annie had wanted him to leave the private investigation business because he'd been shot again. And she wasn't very happy about that. So I started working on him to try to talk him into coming back into the business and see if he could find out some of this stuff. Well, it was a little tough for him to resist. And so he goes and he gets a hold of some of his friends, former military intelligence guys and federal law enforcement agents, et cetera, and asks them what the skivvy is about this Karen Silkwood case. Well, the answer comes back, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Watch out for that one, and he said, well, what's going on there? Well, she was wiretapped. She had big, heavy wiretaps out on her. Big national security wiretaps were on this lady. And her home was bugged, and she had some kind of really dynamite papers of some sort that apparently got taken out of her car in some weird place where they didn't know that the car was taken somewhere, they said, after it crashed up. And they couldn't figure out exactly where it was from the info they were getting back, but that's where the documents got taken out of the car. So, Billy Taylor wasn't about to resist a thing like that. And so he calls me back and says, okay, I think we can handle this. He says, but of course, standard fees for a AAA licensed private investigator are $300 a day, plus all expenses. So, if your folks can get that up, I'll see what I can do to find out about this stuff. So we start scrambling around, and since I didn't have $300 an hour in my pocket or anything, I figured we had to find out where to get this. But I knew we had that piece potentially in place. So then I had to dig around and try to find out some more information, and so I go over to Peter Stockton, who is the chief investigator for the House Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight. And by this time, the National Organization for Women had gotten onto the full crank, and it started to put lots of pressure on Congress to hold congressional investigations. So Senator Lee Metcalf from Montana and Congressman John Dingell from Detroit, Michigan, were cranking up to get ready to hold some hearings. So I go over to see Peter, and Peter says, look, I can't talk with you about this stuff. We're having all kinds of investigations going on. And I said, look, Peter, I understand that this lady was wiretapped, a lot of electronic surveillance and stuff going on against her. And he goes, well, how'd you find that out? And I said, I just found it out, and I'm trying to find out from you if that's true or not. He said, well, a really peculiar thing happened. He said, we were getting set to go with this investigation. He said, and first thing that happened, he said that all of a sudden, Lee Metcalf holds a press conference and announces that the Karen Silkwood hearings are all canceled. He said, since I worked for Dingell and I hadn't heard anything about that, I was a little confused, and I went to try to find out about this. Turns out that the night before his announcement, he had had this secret meeting with Dean McGee of Kerr McGee Corporation. And so I said, look, can you find out who else was in the meeting with him? He says, well, I'll try. So he looks around and he finds out that in the meeting with Lee Metcalf was a fellow by the name of Robert Bennett. We check up on the background of Robert Bennett. He comes from the firm of Robert Mayhew in Washington, D.C., where E. Howard Hunt came from. And we said, ooh. Now that's good. That's good. Let's see what else we can get here. So he was all irritated, and so he decides he's going to go forward. Dingell's going to go forward with these congressional hearings, right? So I said, it's the wiretap information I want, Peter. I want to find out who did this stuff. So a few days later, strangely enough, he calls me back, and he says, the strangest thing happened here. He said, I was sitting in my office, and this lady comes into the office. Her name is Jackie Sarugi. And she's a reporter for the Nashville, Tennessean newspaper. And she comes in and she starts telling me that, she says, I understand that you're going to be the investigator on the Karen Silkwood case for Congress. Well, I've got all this information. You should really cancel this investigation. It's going to prove to be a terrible embarrassment. Karen Silkwood, smoked marijuana. She used to go to bed with everybody in the whole world. And, she did all this kind of stuff. And he's listening to her go on and on and on. And he said, well, gee, you seem to know an awful lot about this Silkwood lady. Where'd you get all that information? She said, well, right from the transcripts. He said, what transcripts were those? She says, well, the transcripts of her telephone conversations. I got them right here, she says. Turns out there's this big, long transcript of all our telephone conversations. Peter Stockton said, well, gee, where'd you get those? He said, well, Jim Reading gave them to me. Jim Reading is the chief of security for the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation. I said, well, gee, how in the world, how'd you get to have a meeting with him? Oh, well, Larry Olson set me up with this meeting. Who's Larry Olson? Well, he's the FBI guy that was in charge of the investigation for the Karen Silkwood case. Well, how'd you know this guy, Larry Olson? Oh, I used to work with him when he was the head of COINTELPRO down in Nashville, Tennessee. COINTELPRO is a counterintelligence program for the FBI where they were infiltrating all of the anti-war groups and the black civil rights movement and all that kind of stuff, writing poison pen letters to wives saying, your husband, he says he's out at these big meetings, but he's really going to bed with his secretary and all this stuff. The FBI, real famous program that they had going. And it's the one that they got caught in the middle of by Senator Frank Church during his Senate subcommittee hearings on intelligence abuses, etc. We happened to be privileged to have one of the 50 copies of the official documents that they actually put out in front of their room one morning for their public release, and we got ours before the FBI got all the rest of them. And so we know a lot of those things to be true. As a sidelight on that point, if you want to read up on any of that particular stuff, there's a really interesting book. It's a book it's a book called The Age of Surveillance, and it's written by a man by the name of Frank Donner. Very well documented book, very thorough in its whole discussion of this entire program. So anyway, Peter Stockton's a little bit taken aback by this woman, and he ends up explaining to me that what she said to him. And so we put into the complaint the allegation that in fact the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation had engaged in a conspiracy to deprive Karen Silkwood and the other associates she had at the plant of their constitutionally guaranteed rights, so that we got a federal civil rights action. So therefore it's a federal cause of action, so we hook on to that one a standard lawsuit against the company for contaminating Karen Silkwood with this plutonium that destroyed everything in her home. So we're off and running. We've got the thing filed, and then it turns around, and because we've filed the case, the United States Congress withdraws from the investigation, saying, you can't have us investigating a matter if someone's litigating it. I'd never quite heard that rule before. You know, I didn't understand that rule. There was no precedent that I'd ever heard about that, but they were gone. And it turns out that later, the FBI comes on and they go after Peter Stockton, saying that he was using federal funds while he was investigating the Silkwood case to go to houses of prostitution out in Oklahoma. And they go after John Zigenthaler, who was the editor and publisher of the Nashville Tennessean, who came on to testify about Jackie Sarugi. And the day after he testified, the FBI goes down to Nashville, Tennessee, and starts interrogating all of his friends and business associates, asking them whether or not they knew that John Zigenthaler liked to go to bed with little girls. And then the FBI goes after John Dingell, and 2 weeks before his campaign was to kick off, a woman appears in Detroit and has a big press conference announcing that she's a prostitute and that she's got lots of mafia people for her clients, but her favorite client of all is Big John Dingell. And so it turns out we located her in meetings with the FBI 1 week before her auspicious press conference. So all the people on the Hill start getting really chilled, and they decide that this isn't such a good idea to be pursuing this Karen Silkwood case. Needless to say, we were really excited by that time, and we figured that there had to be a rat in the woodpile here somewhere, or else they wouldn't be going to all this trouble. So we get the information that she's been wiretapped, so I then start working around on some discovery, and I get a call from a lady by the name of Sheila O'Donnell, who works for a thing called Counterspy magazine. And I'm doing a lecture over at the George Washington University Law School on First Amendment rights and Fourth Amendment rights, and she comes over there. She said, pulls me aside, she says, Danny, she said, have you ever heard of a group called the LEIU? I said, no. I said, I don't know who the LEIU is. She said, well, either do I. And that's our work. We do all this stuff about CIA and FBI abuses, all that. And I said, well, how'd you get this information? She said, well, a guy that is in the local rep for the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, up in New Hampshire, he filed a lawsuit when they arrested all the kids up there at Seabrook, that put on the big demonstration, and they arrested them all and put them in school buses and gymnasiums and all this kind of stuff because they didn't have room for them in their jails, that ACLU files a lawsuit against them up there for violating the civil rights of all those people and makes a motion for discovery for surveillance information. And he got the case dismissed because he didn't plead it right, and he gets it dismissed, so he never got any discovery. A few weeks later, the local U.S. attorney meets this guy and says, "Hey, listen, I'm not such a big SOB. There wasn't really that much surveillance going on against these people anyhow." So the ACLU lawyer says, "Well, what was there going on?" He said, "Well, most I know," he says, "they were getting this little weekly digest, some kind of little pamphlet of some sort that was telling stuff about them." ACLU guy says, "Well, can I see that?" "Well," he says, "you can see it, but I'm not going to let you copy any of them." So he says, "Okay." So he goes to the U.S. Attorney's office. He starts reading through this thing. Here's this thing called Information Digest, and it's written by a woman by the name of S. Louise Reese. And he's going through this thing, and he's talking all about the Clamshell Alliance and who smokes dope and who goes to bed with whom and all these kind of inside wars they're having in the clamshell. And he keeps popping into this LEIU, references to this LEIU, and he can't figure out who these people are, but they seem to be the source of this information. So I took that information from her, and I go to see Bill Taylor, William Johnstone Taylor, and I say, "Billy, find out for me, if you will, who's doing the surveillance against these people that they consider to be anti-nuclear. And when you're at it, find out about this LEIU." So he gives a call to a guy that he refers to as his uncle, and who's in military intelligence, and asks him, who's doing this surveillance against these people at these nuclear facilities, and who's this LEIU? A few days later, call comes back, and folks who've been with me earlier in the last couple of days have heard this part. Call comes back from his uncle, and he says, "Go to Georgia." And Billy says, "Where in Georgia?" The guy says, "That's all I can tell you." So Billy Taylor and I get out this big map of Georgia. And we start looking around on Georgia. As I said to the folks this afternoon, this is very sophisticated investigative techniques that we use. That you got to go to school for years to know about that stuff. So we open up this map of Georgia, and we start looking around, and we find there's this great big nuclear reactor just outside of Atlanta called the Hatch plant, Hatch 1, Hatch 2. So Billy Taylor mounts up, on the $5.85 or so that we had in the Treasury at the time, and he goes down to Georgia outside of Atlanta. He's wandering around this little town, and he finally gets to meet somebody who works in the payroll department of the Georgia Power Company, which is the big utility that owns this thing, right? He gets them to let him see a copy of the payroll printout. And he figures that he's going to look down the names of all the people on the payroll and see if he can find the name of anybody that he recognizes as one of these kind of sleazebags, as he refers to them, that does this kind of stuff. So he's looking down through the list of names and comes to this guy. His name is Bill Lovins. "Oh, Bill Lovins," he says. Bill Lovins was this old sleazebag that used to be in Marine Corps CID that used to do anything, So he looks him up and finds the Social Security number for the guy on the payroll things and does a background on him, and sure enough, that's the guy. So he goes, He looks in there, and he finds coded on the printout a code number for the division that he's in Georgia Power. And he goes down through the list and finds the code number for other names of people that are in that same division. And then he goes and checks on that division, and he finds out that the name of that division, it's a group inside the Public Relations Division of the Georgia Power Company. The name of the group is Risk Management. Risk Management, he says. Well, he says that sounds like a likely candidate. Checks out the backgrounds of the other people in this division, finds out that the division is headed up by a man by the name of Arthur Benson. Does a background on Arthur Benson. Arthur Benson is former Central Intelligence Agency Phoenix Project, an assassin for the Central Intelligence Agency from Southeast Asia. He goes, ooh. Turns out that the dozen men who were in that division are all former CIA, FBI, BCI, State Bureaus of Criminal Investigation guys, and they're all in this division. So he says, this is it. We got to go get a look at this thing. So he gets the address off the payroll voucher for Bill Lovins, and he goes and stakes out his house, follows him around for a few days to see where the guy's going, and sees that the guy after work goes to this bar fairly regularly. So Taylor goes over to this bar and hangs out for a few days. This is a tough job we've got. He goes out and hangs around for a few days. It's even tougher because he doesn't drink. And so he's hanging around drinking ginger ale, and getting bloated here for a few days. And finally this guy, Bill Lovins, comes in. And he goes, "Hey, Bill Lovins, you old SOB," and he starts all this Marine Corps talk about how they were in the crotch together and all this thing, for all you Marine Corps enthusiasts. And talks about the CIA guys and all the military intelligence guys, and he's throwing names all over the place. And this guy figures, gee, I must know this guy from somewhere. And so finally, he ends up trying to recruit Bill Taylor to join the risk management division. It's a good deal they got here. And so brings Bill Taylor on over to the risk management office and starts telling him all this great stuff about the guy. He shows him this big UNIVAC they've got, this big card thing that sort of goes, this big thing goes up and down with all these cards on it. They've got cards on all these people all around Georgia, people who've written letters to the editor, and people who belong to the Sierra Club, and a couple guys on the city council who ask questions about this nuclear facility. And, a lot of these other people that they designated as potential terrorists. They've got this huge list of names. They've got all their bank accounts and bank records. They've got all their checks of who they write checks to and all this kind of stuff. They got their credit card information. All their credit card information, whether they smoke dope or not, who they go to bed with, what the license numbers are on the plates that they've been seen in, and all this stuff. Taylor's looking at this stuff and going, gee, this is really something. And he says, oh yeah, and plus this other thing. He says, we got a guy who's a former FBI guy who is the chief of security for the Bell Telephone Company down here. And every time we want to get a hold of one of these telephones, we just go see this guy and give him the telephone number of who we're after. He'll go and go to the headquarters for the security division and tell them that he has reason to believe that this phone is engaged in theft of services from the phone company. So they will hook up a security monitor onto this phone, which they just happen to set up out at the risk management office of Georgia Power. So Bill Taylor sees this room they've got, opens up the door, there's a room with like about 100 telephones on the floor. And each one of them is hooked up to this little voice-activated Sony tape recorder. So that when the phone rings, it comes on, click, on goes the tape recorder, and they record all the telephone conversations. So Bill Taylor says to him, gee, can't you get in trouble for doing this kind of thing? Guy goes, nah, we give all the information to the LEIU. Billy Taylor goes, good, great, that's great. So he calls me back, he's on a safe phone, he says, we're getting it. And I said, who's LEIU? He says, I don't know. He says, but they're sending him all this information. So I said, well, keep at it, see what we can get. So he goes up and down this list and doing the background checks on all these guys that are in this risk management division. He discovers that in addition to Arthur Benson, there are 3 other guys who at one time or another in their past history worked at the Boynton Beach Police Department in Florida. He says, Boynton Beach Police Department, what's that got to do with anything? So, but it's not right, there's something wrong here. So he's going to go down to Boynton Beach and try to figure out what this is. Goes down to Boynton Beach, Florida, and he's asking around, checking around. Turns out that Arthur Benson came directly to the Boynton Beach Police Department, directly out of the Central Intelligence Agency's Phoenix project, and set up a special intelligence unit in the Boynton Beach Police Department. Got a big LEAA grant, a Law Enforcement Assistance Administration grant from the Federal Justice Department, used it to hire a bunch of other guys, and they bought a big helicopter. And these guys in the Special Intelligence Unit, every Tuesday afternoon, they get in this helicopter and they fly away. And they don't come back until Thursday night. Nobody ever knows where they go. So Billy Taylor tells me about this. We get a hold of Bob Fink. Bob Fink was the researcher for Woodward and Bernstein at the Washington Post that did all their research for the Watergate stuff and for their books on all the president's men in the final days and stuff. And so he knows all this. He can chase documents like nobody you know. And so we tell him to find out about that helicopter. And where's that helicopter going? Oh, nothing to it, he says, piece of cake. He goes over to the FAA and finds the flight records that are on file for this helicopter, right? And it turns out that the helicopter's flying over from Boynton Beach and it's going on over to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And it lands at this place called the Executive Airport. Billy Taylor drives over to the Executive Airport. And he sees this place and he says, hey, I know this place. This is where I used to land on Air America flights when I was in military intelligence. You know, this is a Central Intelligence Agency place, he says. So he's looking all around, and next door to this place, there's this new building, a humongous, great big old building with big, huge barbed wire fences up all around it, with no signs on it, no anything. And out in back of it, on the water, there are these two big PT boats with these big microwave relay dishes on them. And he's going, what's this place? So he starts trying to find out about it, you know. Nothing, finding out nothing. Everywhere he goes, finding out nothing. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows who runs it, you know. It's a black hole, this place, right? So he keeps on looking. He says, calls me up on a safe phone. He says, I think this is it. I think this is it. I think we got it here. I'm saying, well, what is it? He says, I don't know, but I think this is it. So I says, okay, we'll find out what it is. So he keeps checking around, and finally, in Boynton Beach, he goes to the fire department, and he finds a deputy fire inspector who lets him into the files, because he's a AAA licensed private investigator, you know, former federal agent.